In this lesson, we are going to be setting up our WinForms project and our class library project, as well as adding them to Git and GitHub. After that, we will do some initial configuration to ensure we are ready to get started. Now, this is lesson number 2 in our complete course on building a Postman clone. This course has been designed to be beginner-friendly and an example of what you might put in a portfolio. Although, don't just directly put this course in your portfolio. Your portfolio needs to be uniquely yours, not just a copy of someone else's work. If you want to go further in C#, I would encourage you to go to imtimcorey.com and check out the Dev Pass. Once you get the Dev Pass, I would recommend starting with a master course to get job ready, and then fill in your gaps with one or more of the dozens of topic-specific courses that are included. The Dev Pass will get you up to speed and keep you up to date in your software development career. So let's jump into Visual Studio. And here I'm using Visual Studio 2022. It's the latest version as of the time of this recording. And we're going to do a new project. We're going to choose, we can choose either a class library or a Windows Form app first. It does not matter which we choose first, but I'm going to show you, let's do the class library first. I want to show you how this might be a problem. So if you do it in this order, we'll have one extra step to do, okay? If you do the other order, you don't have that step, but I want to show you the extra step just in case it happens to you. Okay, so we're going to choose class library first. Notice I just searched for C# and library and got class library. Also note, this is going to be a .NET 8 project. So if you come down here, you will probably see class library .NET framework. That's different. That's the old .NET framework as opposed to .NET, which is actually .NET Core. So just note, choose class library. It should be a .NET 8 project. Now, if .NET 9 is out, you can absolutely choose .NET 9. Just know if there are any differences, that may be why. So as a developer, you're going to have differences in tutorials compared to what you see. You're going to have to figure out how to navigate those because of the fact that life moves on. And you may say, well, I wish it was slower. Yes, but it's not. And so you have to accept what is rather than trying to wish for something different. So for our library, we're going to call this app Postman Clone. And let's call it Postman Clone Library. And we'll call this Postman Clone App. So the solution name is Postman Clone App. The project name is Postman Clone Library. Now, some people do, Postman Clone .library. You can do that. It creates a namespace that's, Postman Clone would be the kind of the root namespace, and then library is for your library. I just do Postman Clone Library here. It's fine. I do like to have the name library in here because it's very clear what this is. And so that way when we're looking at which way the references go, we do it the right direction. We only ever add a reference to a library. We don't add a reference to a UI. So we're storing this in the C practice folder. That's fine. I do not want to place the solution project in the same directory. And the reason why is I'm going to have more than one project. So I don't want my solution in one project folder and then have to navigate other projects. I would encourage you, just don't ever check that box. Okay, hit next. And yes, .NET 8 is what we're going to be using. Now, again, you can use .NET 9 or .NET 10. That would work. And in fact, for the most part, these things will probably work the exact same way in later versions. Microsoft is good about trying not to have too many breaking changes where it causes backward compatibility issues. So it should be that things work very, very similar in .NET 9 or 10. But if you ever had a problem, you could go back to .NET 8 to follow along. It's up to you. We hit create. And wait for the project to be done. And once it's done, we're going to create another project right away. So we're going to leave class 1. I'll wait to configure all these things until after we are done with our initial setup of our projects and also once we've added to Git and GitHub. So I'm going to right click on a solution and say add new project. and I want a Windows Forms project. So let's change this drop down here to desktop. You can also do a search. That's fine too. Again, Windows Form app. It does not say .NET Framework, just the Windows Form app. We hit next, and we're going to call this Postman Clone UI. Okay. Again, we could call it something totally different if you wanted to, but we're going to call it just the UI and .NET 8. Okay. Now we have set up our project for our class library and our project for our form. Note, you'll get this message more than once if you're like me and you have your main display zoomed in. So right now I'm running on a 4K display, but I'm running in 1080p mode. I've kind of zoomed into 1080p by doing 200% zoom. Okay, that way I can record in 4K, but yet still have it be visible for people who are on phones or tablets. So what that's going to do though is going to pop up this message saying, hey, your main display is set to 200%. Consider opening the WinForm Designer in DPI unaware mode. We're not going to do that for this course, but just note that there's some kind of rabbit hole you can go down about working with DPI and DPI unaware and all the rest. We're going to leave that alone. Okay, so again, we're not going to set anything up yet, but I want to show you one thing that's going to be that extra step I said. So if you did your library first and then your UI, then your library is the one that's the startup project. And if you try and just hit run right now, just to verify that things are working, well, they're not working. And in fact, you'll see an error message pop up. It says, and make sure to read these messages. The message says a project with the output type of class library cannot be started directly. If you get this error message, that means that you've tried to run your class library. Class libraries cannot be executed. So you need to change which project is the startup project. So you hit OK. Don't freak out. Always read your error messages. They're valuable. As a developer, you need to read those messages. You need to work on understanding those messages, because if you don't, well, then you're going to always be in the dark and always missing a lot of vital information. So we have, if you notice, Postman Clone Library is bold, whereas Postman Clone UI is not bold. That indicates that Postman Clone Library is the startup project. If you right-click on Postman Clone Library, you can set as startup project right here, and that will choose the correct project to start from. Or notice where you have the play button up here, it says Postman Clone Library. There's a drop-down. You can choose instead to configure startup projects. And here you can change this drop-down to Postman Clone UI. Either way works. Notice that now Postman Clone UI is bold, and it says Postman Clone UI in the play button. And if we were to run this, well, then we can see that the form actually starts. So that's all well and good. Okay, we now have the startup project correct. That's the one extra step I was talking about. If you create your project UI first, well, then your UI would be set as the startup project. You wouldn't have to change the startup project. It'd already be there. The first project becomes the startup project. Okay, so with that, we have now set up our initial structure. I want to add this into Git and GitHub. So I'm going to go to Git changes here. And if you don't have this, you can go to, I believe it's under View, Git changes. So make sure you have that open. And when you do, it says, hey, version control isn't being used yet. Do you want to create a Git repository? Why, yes, I do. So I click that, and because my font size is so small, it's going to make it, I have to make it bigger. But it knows it says local path, and it knows where my app is located. My git ignore template, by default, it uses a Visual Studio git ignore template. If you don't know what git ignore is, basically, it ignores certain files that shouldn't go into source control. For example, any of our executables we create or DLLs we create, they shouldn't be in source control. In fact, anything we create as part of the build process shouldn't go into source control because we can rebuild it. And therefore, we don't need to put that into source control. So the gitignore file knows which files Visual Studio creates that we don't want in source control. By default, it just works out of the box if we use that template. Okay, license, none. We're going to use no license because if you use no license, that means that we are not allowing anybody to do anything with our source code. So none means we retain all the rights. It does not mean that we have no rights. Okay, it means we've retained every single right. If we add a license, that means we're giving away some type of right. Like we're saying you can copy this, or you can use this in your project, or you can have free license to my source code, whatever that license might say. But if we say none, we're retaining all rights. We do want to add a readme.md file. It's always good to have a readme if you're doing a GitHub repository, which we are, because that way we have something to kind of explain to the user what's going on in this source code. That'll be very valuable in the future when we set this up as a portfolio project, because we're going to configure that README to have some screenshots and explanation of what this project is and why it's important to be in our portfolio. Okay, account, Tim Corey, owner, I'm going to change to I am Tim Corey. Postman clone app, I prefer to do Postman clone app with the all lowercase and the dashes in between. So you can change your repository name. And this is our clone of Postman recreated in Windows Forms. Okay, something simple. Your description needs to be a really clear explanation of what your project is. Now, I want to choose private repository. Remember, I'm not sharing a source code for this, at least not unless I put it into the dev pass on my site. But the reason why is I want you to do this on your own. I don't want you to just copy my code. I want you to actually do it. I'll do everything on screen. So I want you to do it along with me so that you have that practice, not just a false sense of security, knowing that you could do it because you haven't actually done it. So do it along with me. Now I've chosen GitHub over here. If you want to use Azure DevOps, that's fine, or local only. If you didn't want to use anything remote, that's fine as well. But for us, we're going to do this. We're going to say create and push. Okay, and it's going to move around a little bit. We've got 2 commits. It just pushed them up there. We're good to go. So we've done everything to put this into source control. If you notice now, there are little lock icons over here. So notice every file has a little lock icon indicating that it's in source control and it has not been changed. We'll change a couple of these things and see the differences as we go. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're unfortunately going to leave class 1 in our class library, because the reason why Microsoft puts anything here, and class 1 should be deleted, but the reason something is here because otherwise there is no namespace. So notice that since we have class 1, well, then there is a namespace called Postman clone library. If we did not have class 1, then there would be no namespace. Therefore, we could not reference this library at all. So for now, we're going to leave it, but we're going to add the library as a dependency. So I'm going to click on the library. I'm going to drag it onto the dependency of the UI. That's a really quick way to add a dependency. Also, you could right-click on the UI dependencies and say Add Project Reference, and notice the checkbox is checked for Postman Clone Library. So it's kind of a little shortcut there to make life easy. Okay, so now Postman Clone UI knows about the class library, and it can access the code inside the class library. That's step number 1 for us. Another we're going to do is rename form 1, and we name this something valuable. For me, I like calling this dashboard because that's the first form, and when the dashboard is closed, the application closes. So dashboard, and we do want to perform a rename in the project of all references to the code element form 1. Yes. So now in our code, so our code behind, notice we have dashboard here. If we right click and say view code. It says dashboard and dashboard. And also in program.cs, it says new dashboard. So we're all set there. The next thing I'm going to do is let's just make this a file scope namespace by putting a semicolon here. Just give this 4 extra spaces. We're not going to play around too much in program.cs in the first couple lessons, but later on, we're going to come back to this and make some modifications. So I want that extra space back. And it's always good when you're going to do some setup work to do it all at once if you can, because that way your commit is going to be all about the setup work that you're doing. Okay, and notice again, we have the lock icon on class1.cs, but on the Postman clone UI, we have a red check mark. On dashboard.cs, we have a green plus indicating it's a new file versus the red check mark as a changed file. So we are tracking our file changes now. Okay, back over on our form. Let's open this form up. And we're going to select the form itself and go to Properties. Now, if you don't have Properties, go to View, scroll down here, and it's Properties window at the bottom. Click on that or hit F4. Okay, so in Properties, and I prefer to have Properties as a separate menu item, not in this list. So sometimes Properties is, let's see if we can drag it here. Sometimes Properties is like here, where it's with Solution Explorer, or sometimes it's below it. I don't like it being below it, because then you have something like this, where it's like, okay, I can't really see Solution Explorer, I can't really see Properties. But you can drag these out. No, I can drag it out, I can put it anywhere I want. I'm going to put it over here. Notice there's a bunch of different icon indicators. This center one says, hey, I'm going to put it as another tab in this tab list, or I could put it as another flyout separate from Solution Explorer. So I could put it just behind as the full tab, and now I can move this around too. But now I can reuse the same window for Properties and not have to have my screen real estate taken up by everything. It's up to you how you do it. You can also unpin these things and have them hide and so on. But just so you know, that's what you can do with your windows to make sure Visual Studio works for you. Okay, notice there's not many things in this list. That's because even though it looks like the form is selected, the form is not actually selected. So select the form, and now everything changes. First, I want to change the text here. That will change this text in the top here. Right, it'll change this text right here. So let's change this to Postman clone by Tim Corey. And yes, this does not have to match the name of your form, just so you know. But now it's kind of more indicative of what this form is about. Next up, I want to change the font size. Font size is 9 point, and you've probably already seen the video, if you've already seen the video from where I showed off how that font size affects all the other controls. So I did a 10-minute training video on this, but what we're going to do is we're going to change this by default to be 18. That way we start off with a good font size, and all of our controls by default get that 18 point. Okay, I think that's about it for what I want to do for these projects. I've renamed things, I've set things up. I've set up even the startup project. I think we're all set. Yes, class 1 is still there, but I don't have a class to put in its place. I'm going to leave it alone. All right, so go over to Git Changes, and there's all my changes. And I'm going to stage them all. And now I am going to give this a commit message. And we're not going to focus too hard on the perfect commit message and all the rest, but initial project tweaks, something like that, sets the UI and library projects up to be in a good spot to start work. Okay, something like that. That's all we need to do. And now with that, we can, there we go. It had my Git was not configured properly, so I had to tweak my Git in order to add my settings. So now that my Git is configured properly, we can commit stage. That makes more sense here. So I'm going to commit and sync because I know there's nothing on the server. I could do a fetch to make sure. I can do this fetch, this little dyed arrow right here that just pulls down but doesn't merge in any commits to make sure that you don't have anything there. And notice I am committing right to, in this case, the master branch. That was what was created by default. I'm not worrying about doing pull requests or other things. When I'm first doing a project or I'm doing a project alone, it's okay just to commit right to the main branch. So we will commit staged and sync. Okay, so that's it. We've now got our commit up on GitHub. We have all of our changes set, and we've got an initial setup for our project, which means we can move on to the next step in the next lesson where we start working on the UI and getting the UI set up to be a clone of Postman. Now, since you know that's our next step, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that next step. Yes, before you watch me, go do it yourself. So you'll have about a week probably to get this done. So set up your UI. Don't worry about the business logic. Don't worry about the actual data access, how it's going to work. Just set up your UI and what it might look like to be a very simple Postman clone. Just kind of some hints here. What I'm going to do is we're going to set up a way to do gets for now. Just doing a get to an API and displaying the formatted results into a text box. So that's really all we're going to do for step one of this project. We want to get something working and get it into our portfolio. From there, we can continue to improve and change it over time. So for right now, though, we're just going to get this working with get commands to an API that the user specifies, and have a results window that will show off what the returned JSON looks like. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and get that done, and then when I do mine, you can kind of compare what you did compared to what I did. All right, thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.